For the next hour, we are focusing on the skies with two of life's great dropouts. The Moonwalkers at the Lightroom at King's Cross is an immersive experience of the Apollo missions, from the launchpad tragedy of Apollo 1 in 1967 to the final mission in 1972. The script and narration of the Moonwalkers is by a fledgling young actor with a passing interest in space. He goes by the name of Tom Hanks. Remember the name, we're expecting huge things from him. And if that wasn't enough, he's one of our own. He's one of our own. Major Tim Peake is one of our own. Not only was Tim
That's all Tim Peake needs? Oh,
not only was he the first Brit to walk in space, he ran a marathon. He ran a marathon up there. We're living on the ISS. He's now preparing to go on tour around the UK with his new show, Astronauts, The Quest to Explore Space. Welcome to Radio 2, Tom Hanks and Tim Peake.
Tim Peake, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, my Lord.
You guys met before today?
We haven't, but
no,
I'm a huge fan. So
I've seen the name. When you dangle such an accomplishment as the first Brit to walk in space, my Lord, that's huge. And with 10 minutes to do absolutely nothing up there, according to Mission Control, that to me, that's the high. I'd do that.
I would definitely do that again. That was the high point of the mission, without a doubt.
So, who inspired you guys in terms of astronauts? Tim, who were the astronauts that the early space shuttle years for you that were really
early space shuttle years? Yes, my mum used to be interested in the space program of Formula One, so I guess there was always that kind of introduction to speed from the early age. And so the shuttle era was what I grew up with. But actually flying was my passion, and looking at the test pilots of those early years. I mean, from the Chuck Yeager to Neil Armstrong flying the X-15 and on to Bruce McCandless, doing his untethered spacewalk out of the Challenger. These kind of groundbreaking moments in space flight that have just been, taking huge amounts of courage and huge amounts of confidence in your equipment. I think they really have inspired me.
I'm going to say the co-pilot on the very first flight of the space shuttle was John Young. Bob Crippen was the pilot. John Young walked on. John Young was he's the all-star of all astronauts from Gemini and Paul. He walked on the moon on Apollo 16.
Yeah.
Nothing to sneeze at, John Young.
No. Took a corned beef sandwich up as well.
That's right. Got in trouble for it. Yeah. It was a bit of a joke
with Gus Grissom. Yeah,
they had to spend a long time sitting on their backs waiting to go, and they were going to get hungry. So he took a corned beef sandwich up in.
And that's a lot of particles floating around, right? Is that why they get so annoyed?
That was the problem.
But relatively pleasant compared to some other things that can float around up there. Well, I've heard some stories. Prefer corned beef.
What about you, Tom? Was it Jim Lovell for you? Was it?
No, I grew up at a time when the space race was a part of our daily lessons at school. I don't quite remember the Mercury space program, but I certainly knew who John Glenn was. It was part of it. But I really got into it. I lived in a town that had a naval air station right next to it, and this was in the early of the Vietnam War. So there was always jets flying over us. There was always pilots. There was always a uniformed presence there in town and amongst my classmates. And the space program was every discipline in school touched upon the space program. Current events. What American and what Russian went up. Politics, us versus them. Yeah, there was certainly science galore about all the rendezvous and what was going on. There was also history talked about because this was happening in real time before our very eyes. I grew up at the age of I was born in '56. By 1965, I knew that a man was going to walk on the moon in my lifetime in a few years. And so it was like a ticking clock for me. I paid attention to it all.
And is that where Moonwalkers came from? Because it seems like it's basically a love letter to the Apollo program, right?
Yeah, it is, because I have seen so much information. I've seen so many images, and it was not until I owe this all actually to David Hockney, the artist. Yeah, because Lightroom did a fantastic.
I saw it. It was gorgeous.
That was a very immersive moment, and I'm seeing David Hockney's sets for his operas, and then hearing the opera music, and then seeing the sets come alive. I went over to Richard Slaney and the other guys who work at Lightroom, and I said, you could put human beings on the moon if you wanted to, and I can only imagine what you could do visually. And that was the moment we began working on it.
So much footage, like so much archive. It's so beautiful. Like,
well, and here's what's great about it too is there's not a moment of CGI in it. Those are all, we have drawings, we have artist renderings, but if you're seeing an image from the moon and in space, it was taken by astronauts not unlike Tim Peake.
Jim, have you seen this?
I've seen it twice. I need to go twice more, at least, because there is so much footage. And you're right, that initial, the Saturn V launch is a visceral experience, and you just really feel the power and the enormity of that kind of moment.
Well, now you went up in the you were saying
in the Soyuz.
The Soyuz.
Yeah.
Now, does that give you a big kick in the pants when it?
It's I guess it's a little bit faster off the tracks there because it's a smaller, lighter rocket, but you don't get the same feeling of kind of raw power, I think, that the Saturn V had. But they're actually fairly similar times into orbit.
I love the way you're sort of downplaying going up in the sun. It's like,
it wasn't that big.
Yeah.
When you look back, though, to the early Mercury rocket launches on those Redstones, now that's a kick because they were ballistic missiles. They weren't ever designed to carry humans into space. They were doing 11 Gs on the way back down. So, I mean, that's amazing. They were up in space in a couple of minutes.
But you're going up in essentially the same rocket motors that the Russians have been using since 1960.
67.
They built them once and they still work, and it's kind of like saying I drove across the country in a 1972 VW. It's the same exact thing, but you went up to space in a 1972 VW.
And you feel that when you get inside, I can tell you.
Listen, we're going to play some music we've kind of tailored this hour to you two, so I hope you appreciate it. Let's kick off with a little bit of this.
One of the most evocative pieces of music in history.
This was when you first fell in love, right? I just read the Oakland Raiders have beaten the Kansas City Chiefs, which, if people listening don't understand what that means, it basically means Liverpool have beaten Manchester United. And when you're a North Californian boy, that's probably all you care about.
That's right. And the football stadium was right across the freeway from the movie theater where I saw this from. And it was the first time I had seen really cinema that was based on nothing more as Kubrick. And it was light, and it was imagery, and it was music. No dialogue, and that opening piece of music by Strauss. Sometimes it's called Also sprach Zarathustra, or Thus Spake Zarathustra. It is the moment of synergy. You're on the far side of the moon, and it's dark, but you get a sense of it from star glow or whatever. And the camera rises, and the moon and the earth and the sun have all lined up, which is a key part of the movie. And I think I was 13 years old, but I had to scrape my brain off the back wall of the theater because it just blew my mind.
And then was it a couple of months later, Apollo 8?
Well, yeah, I would have seen that in that would have been in like November of 1968, I think it was. And then I was at home in my mom's house, watching a color TV, which was amazing. But then this black and white broadcast came from Earth orbit, and it was of Apollo 8. It was Bill Anders, Jim Lovell, and Frank Borman that had gone. They were the first human beings to orbit the moon. They did it 10 times, and they did I could not quite fathom. The first thing I saw was this out of focus black and white blur that then they adjusted the camera. And then it was a crystal clear. I recognized the Earth. There was the clouds. Even though it was black and white, but it was gray. It was white, and the Cron said live from the orbit of the moon, the live broadcast of Apollo 8. And the difference between the fantasy and the movie version that Kubrick gave me, and the reality of an actual broadcast from lunar orbit, they were one and the same to me.
Yeah,
and it always has been. It's always been.
I mean, that's the thing. I think since we got into space, everyone remembers 11, but the more I find out about it, the more I'm fascinated by Apollo 8.
Okay, here's a great story.
Yeah.
You ready for this?
Yeah.
Okay, here's a good story. You might know this, Tim. Charles Lindbergh, who had flown, famous Charles Lindbergh, he visited the crew of Apollo 8 just before they left. And they had breakfast together. It was Jim Lovell and Bill and Frank and the backup crew, and they're all who passes up a breakfast with either astronauts or Charles Lindbergh? You have to do that. And someone asked Charles Lindbergh, "Are you going to come back for the big one?" And he said, "What do you mean?" It was, "Well, Apollo 11, if everything goes according to plan, they'll be going to the moon. Are you going to come for that bit of history?" And Lindbergh waved them off. He says, No. You guys are the important. You are the first human beings that are going to leave the gravitational pull of the Earth, cross the equigravisphere, and come under the influence of the gravitational pull of a body that is not our own.
Yeah.
It was, and that again, that just, if I was going, I'd either want to be on the very last Apollo mission, 17, with Jack Schmitt and Gene Cernan, because they stayed up there for a really long time.
Yeah.
They drove all over the place. They had a good time. Or definitely Apollo 8 to see what it's like. They looked down on the bright side of the far side of the moon, and they were the first human eyes to lay on it.
And I love the fact that Earthrise, the photo that's so iconic now, but it caught them by surprise. And nobody was really expecting to see that, how beautiful the planet would look as they come around from the dark side.
You hear them saying, "Oh, look at that! Look at that! Hey, get the film. Who's got that film?
Yeah.
They pass me the color film. I'll get that. No, I'll get it." Okay, now Tim, this is a big question I have, because I don't think it's ever been answered by any of the astronauts, and some of them the Apollo astronauts. Okay, you're on the night side. Okay, are the stars brighter? Do you see the deep infinite of the time-space continuum when you're when you're in darkness in Earth orbit?
So in Earth orbit, I found that the stars seemed clearer and sharper. I'm not sure they were that much brighter, but just the clarity without having to see.
They don't blink.
Earth's
They don't
atmosphere.
blink.
Yeah,
right.
So you're not getting the twinkling that's caused by our atmosphere.
Could you get a sense of the galaxy? Could you get a sense?
Oh, completely. When the Milky Way rises over the horizon, it's a jaw-dropping moment.
This sounds like a stupid question. You haven't got a telescope on the ISS, have you?
We've got binoculars on the ISS, which are easier to handle and more useful. But you can use the binoculars and obviously get the same kind of perspective that you would
buy them
looking
at the
through there
basement
on
itself. You could just swing by and pick up some cheap pair of binoculars and see the continuum of the time space. You're up there for 186 days. Okay, now just being there, just human beings being in space advances the cause of humanity's exploration of the cosmos. What else? What were the other scientific tasks that you did when you were up there? Experiments or procedures that you think moved the ball down the field?
One that I'm really excited about is one morning I woke up. We were coming up to a spacewalk, and Mission Control said, "Tim, could you go to the printer, the 3D printer, which had only recently come on board the space station, and see what's in there?" So I opened the door, and they'd printed out a tool overnight that was going to be needed for this upcoming spacewalk. And 3D printing this is 2016, was fairly new, but 3D printing in microgravity was very new. There'd been some early failures where it hadn't worked very well. And we've now, just since 2016, we've gone from printing out plastic tools that can be used on spacewalks to now printing out using bioink human tissue. So the process that the pharmaceutical companies are now looking at is in 10 years' time, perhaps printing out human organs from space, taking cells from patients here on Earth and actually printing out a heart. Because in microgravity, you don't need a scaffold system, something like a very fragile 3D structure, which you can't possibly print here on Earth. You can print in space. Protein crystals for diseases like motor neuron disease and Huntington's and Parkinson's. We can grow those protein crystals in space, bring them back down, and then create really pure, good drugs with low side effects, low dosages. So these are amazing.
Huge. This is huge. I'm so glad. I don't understand why this isn't front page news every time.
Yeah. But what I love about the ISS is it's the combination of that, this incredible stuff that's going to take our species forward, with the unbelievably mundane of, okay, finish that. Now you need to go and hoover. Do you genuinely need someone up there that doesn't get involved in all of that? Just goes, I'm just going to hoover or
keep the place clean.
Right, exactly, because everything's floating around. Listen, Tim, I want to speak to you about your launch, and actually, I'm even more interested in your landing, which just sounds absolutely horrible after this. So that's Don't Stop Me Now by Queen, which is the song that was played in your ears as you're about to take off.
It makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up every time I hear that, because that was one of the last songs I heard before the engines fired up.
Do you get to pick your own playlist then?
You get 3 songs. If everything goes well during the countdown process, then there's about 40 minutes just to sit and wait, and you're sitting on top of 300 tons of explosive rocket fuel. So to help us relax and keep calm.
It's like the Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah.
Well, you've gone native. You are very impressive.
Yeah,
3
so
songs.
3 songs.
Do you compare notes? Does anybody pick up the same one sometimes?
Sometimes I knew Tim Coper didn't like Lady Gaga, so I threw a couple of those in as well, because Yuri didn't want any. He's on his 6th trip. He's like, over to you guys,
Oh, so you get his choices.
So I got his choices, yeah. So Poker Face went on there, and I had the
fact you're not
the delight of seeing Tim.
I don't think anything that's going to chill you out at all. Just like really high octane stuff. It's great. Talk us through those couple of hours before.
It's really interesting because you go from it's a dichotomy. You go from this one extreme of a PR buzz. It's hundreds of people milling around. You've got the farewell ceremony, the emotion of saying goodbye to your family that you can only see through the glass and then from a bus. And I had a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old at the time, so saying goodbye to them was very hard, and the cameras and everything, and then you take the elevator ride up to the top of the rocket. And then everything just goes really peaceful and calm, and it reminds me of just strapping into a cockpit. There's so much preparation before a test flight and all the checks and drills you go through. But when you strap in, it changes, and that's the moment actually you kind of relax and you just think, right, now we can get on with what we've been trained to do. And Tim Coper strapped in first, and I was stood outside at the top of this rocket just looking over the steppes of Kazakhstan on this beautiful December evening, just sort of taking the last breaths of fresh air for 6 months, but thinking what an incredible journey it was going to be.
So you had a kind of problem on the way up, didn't you? Navigational issue? Or?
We did, yeah. Launch was great, flawless, and we looked at each other in surprise because every time you do it in the simulator, something goes wrong. So it was the first time we'd ever launched to space and nothing had gone wrong, which was a good thing. And then we were rendezvousing with the space station, and again, it was all going fine till about 17 meters away. And then the Soyuz aborted, and we didn't quite know why. We had multiple failures very quickly in succession, and the thruster system had failed, but then it'd been replaced by this high moisture content failure, which is very trivial. But we thought, well, hang on, so why would a spacecraft be aborting for a high moisture content? And it took us a while to work out what the real problem was. And then Yuri had to take manual control and try and bring us in for a manual docking, which was really challenging because the space station was going from daytime to nighttime. So the sun is behind us, very low on the horizon. The whole space station's silver, looking like a big mirror reflecting all this sunlight back into the optics. The computer systems went down. That was another failure system that went on. And Moscow Mission Control.
I'm counting 3 failures.
At least.
Right? 3 failures.
Well, in aviation, we always talk about the Swiss cheese model. It's never one. It's like layers of Swiss cheese, all the holes lining up.
Yeah.
And that's a bad bad thing. And, we recognized this was happening right there and then in the spacecraft. And Moscow Mission Control were really putting the pressure on for Yuri to hurry up and get the docking done. And the first docking came in very fast, came very close to a near collision. But he had the sense to back off, bring it back, get the spacecraft under control. And third docking attempt was thankfully successful.
I have to speak about coming back down because it just sounds horrific. I mean, it must be a sensory bombardment as well.
The funny thing was, the night before coming home, Jeff Williams, NASA astronaut, was on board, and he said, Tim, I'm just going to talk you through the re-entry. And he said, okay, the spacecraft's going to blow itself into 3 bits, and there's 14 pyrotechnic bolts go off right next to your ear when that happens. Sounds like a machine gun. Then it'll tumble for half an orbit, pretty much out of control, end over end, until you hit the top of the atmosphere, and it'll right itself, heat shield first, and the G will build up. He said the parachutes, when they open, it's ridiculously violent for 20 seconds. But when that finishes, get ready for the bigger jolt of the main canopy. I was thinking, why has nobody told me this before?
Not a soul.
I'm about to come back to Earth. Surely this should have been covered in the training somewhere.
Yeah.
The actual, the physical. I mean, you go through the centrifuge, but the centrifuge is very smooth. The G-forces. The actual physical act of coming back to Earth is very violent. And then you land on the steppes of Kazakhstan with a big bump at the end of it.
And then the doors open and all you can smell is the scorched earth and a burly Russian dragging you out.
Yes. You got a very hot spacecraft, and we landed in the summer on the steppes of Kazakhstan, so it set fire to the prairie. So the ground crew come in, fire extinguishers, put the fires out, roll the capsule upright, and then drag the crew out. So you're looking forward to your first breaths of fresh air and smelling the earthly smells again, and it's not quite the romantic.
And every ounce of your blood is being pulled down to the center of our molten core. How do you feel? Are you lightheaded? Do you have double vision?
You're dizzy, dehydrated, but you don't have double vision. You don't actually have a problem walking either, because we exercise a lot in space, but your heart is really struggling to circulate the blood, because suddenly it's put under immense pressure from gravity, and so they're worried about, the medical team are worried about you fainting, passing out, so you go into those reclined chairs that you have to sit in for a while, and they do the medical test and then take you away to the tent, and then off you go.
Let's talk about training. I mean, and Tom, I want to talk about training with you, because when you were filming Apollo 13, firstly, let's just talk about Apollo 13, because there was, at the time, you were going out a bit on a limb for that film, right?
Yeah.
Because a few people didn't want to make it, and you'd just come off the back.
You know why? Because they said everybody knows the ending.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right.
I mean, you can apply that philosophy to quite a lot of films.
I think so. We did film in the Vomit Comet, the world-famous KC-135.
Right. How did that work?
We had about, depending on what the weather was like, the air, we could have between 22 and 27 seconds of simulated zero gravity, which was magnificent once we got used to it. And we literally built a set. We put it in the airplane, and the first time we shot, every screw, washer, piece of sawdust, corned beef, all just came floating around. I think we have to land and vacuum this thing out very clearly. But if we weren't in the shot, sometimes like Kevin was in the shot or Bill was in the shot, we took up a badminton set, and in the back of the plane played zero gravity badminton.
No way.
Yeah, well, I have some footage of it somewhere.
But I mean, that's an incredible feat of filmmaking, because you've got to work out exactly what you need for the time you need it, right?
Yeah, and it was everybody who had anything to do with it. We were rubbing our hands. We knew that it's kind of like filmmaking at a bit of a cutting edge. We would talk about it, and then we would do the shot. Sometimes, a lot of times, like I would float from the command module through the access tunnel into the lunar module. And then if we need another take, we just reset on the next parabola, because it goes up and a down, and it's up and a down.
Do you feel sick while you're doing it, or did your body just get used to it?
No, we actually took a medication called Scopedex, which was scopopolamine with dexedrine. And it didn't make you feel great, but it did counteract the mayhem that was going on inside it.
So if you got Ron Howard there in the cockpit, and the DOP are there, and they're just saying, okay,
we're all in imagine a 707, and all the seats are taken out, and it's just a big hollow shell. Wow. And it was magnificent. It's as close as we got. If we added up every, like 27 seconds, and we added up, we had as much time in zero gravity as John Glenn did on his 3 orbits of Friendship 7 or what have you. So we added up. So I've got 4 minutes. I got 4 minutes, Tim.
That's brilliant.
The part I'm most fascinated with from the astronauts that go up to the ISS is they're living in a cave. And they're living underwater. Living underwater for 12 days.
Yes.
So is that like a mock ISS that you're living in?
No, the underwater is it's NASA's Nemo mission. It's this underwater habitat called Aquarius off the coast of Florida. And it's really designed to try out space analogs for future missions. So we've done a lot that we're preparing for the Artemis missions. But my one in particular was asteroid redirect mission. So this was during the Obama years, where that was NASA's future mission was looking at doing the asteroid missions. So we were thinking about how we could possibly do spacewalks when we get to an asteroid in a very, very low gravity environment. But unlike the ISS, where it's got plenty of handy handrails and everything you can move around with, how are you even going to grapple, move around, fix yourself? Is it going to be jetpacks? Is it going to be stakes and tether systems? So we spent 12 days on the ocean surface trying to figure some of these things out.
Really?
Yeah.
Outside in the underwater, relatively buoyant, or
Yes,
and working with stakes and lines and little jet propulsion things.
Absolutely. And then we actually had some mini subs come down for the second week. And so this was the concept of having some smaller spacecraft around the asteroid with foot plates. So astronauts could hook themselves to a foot plate, giving them some stability to be able to then extract scientific samples from the surface of the asteroid, this kind of thing.
So you're replicating a spacewalk down there? Basically.
Yeah. And the best thing was we had personal jetpacks, were these sort of
come on,
propeller
sign me up.
They were battery powered propeller driven things that we'd strapped to our back with a push button, and that's when we put fins on. And so with the fins you could direct yourself around. But you've been down the bottom of the sea for 10, 12 days. So the worst thing in the world is getting this thing under control.
Sure.
But if you shoot up to the surface very rapidly,
how far down are you?
30 meters.
Oh, so it's not too bad, but still pretty.
Not too bad, but you're fully saturated with nitrogen.
Tim, if you had the opportunity now to do the ISS again or the moon for maybe 2-3 days on the moon, what would you pick?
The moon. Every single time, I mean, I've got.
Is that because you've been to the ISS?
No, I mean, I think the move for any astronaut is just going to be an incredible mission. And 4 of my friends now, I guess you'd have met them when you opened Moonwalkers in London. Are training for Artemis 2, and we are all just so envious because we'd all like to go to the moon. It's going to be an incredible mission. And as you were saying, Tom, about in your lifetime when you were a teenager, realizing that somebody was going to step onto the surface of the moon. And I don't think that people have fully appreciated that right now. When you talk amongst the public, you say, do you realize in the next 5 years, you're going to be seeing humans step onto the surface of the moon again? And this time we're going to have 4K color HD cameras. Right. I mean, it's going to be absolutely phenomenal.
And we have since seen, there's been there's 25, and all sorts of people are planning on going back to the moon one way or another, a satellite, a probe, a robot, what have you. You know how many of them fail? About 50%, don't quite work out the way they want them to work out. So the odds here are still, I think they're in humankind's favor.
Yeah.
But anything can happen when you're up, as I believe you described in the 3 emergencies that came up just as you were trying to park the damn thing.
Yeah.
So where are we right now, gents, with the Artemis? Like, is it on time? Is it like, and I'm not asking you to betray any secrets or anything, but is it sort of... Have they narrowed down who's going yet, or how?
It has slipped. We have narrowed down the crew for Artemis 2, and that's Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, and Christina Kopp. And who am I missing there? Oh, Jeremy Hansen, of course. A Canadian astronaut who's, I'm so delighted he's got that mission, actually. He was selected the same year that I was selected. A fantastic astronaut. So they're going to be flying an Artemis 2, which won't be going down to the surface of the moon. Artemis 3 will be doing that, which will hopefully be the year after. So at the moment, 25 for Artemis 2, 26 for Artemis 3.
Thank you so much, gents. Well, I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can't let you go before just having a quick chat about Masters of the Air. It's, I mean, such a beautiful piece of work, and one of those kind of, what's interesting about it is, I mean, obviously Band of Brothers and less so the Pacific, because it was like so far removed, I think, from the UK experience, but but the fact they were based here in East Anglia and going over, and there was it became a real UK-US story, I feel.
And likewise, our crew and our cast, we just had the lion's share of the up and comers that are coming back, and incredibly great actors. And it all comes. What is fascinating? These are young guys. Even the crew, they're young guys. But it becomes a labor of intense love for them all. They don't just want to wear their ribbons in the right place or, make sure that they, put the goggles on right or anything. They want to get down to some other kind of ephemeral brass tacks of what these guys went through. And when we were beginning, everybody says, look, I had said to them, there is one word that you guys got to carry with you at every moment that you're on this, working on this, and that is this: pressure, stress. Pressure, the pressure of knowing that tomorrow you're going to have to fly, and you have a 50-50 chance of coming back. One half of everybody that flew on those missions was either wounded, killed, or shot down. Yeah. And so the odds of you coming back are literally heads versus tails. And that pressure has to be visible in every single moment you guys are on. And they took it and they ran with it. I can't speak highly enough.
Yeah, very good cast.
I was in London for the Jubilee, and I happened to be outside with my son for the flyover of one of the Lancasters. And it was just trying to imagine the sky filled with 500 of those, all heading off in the same direction, knowing that there's 10 kids that are in there. Yeah. Maybe the oldest is 24 years old. The youngest could be as young as 18. I can't get past the details.
Phenomenal piece of work, so congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much.
Listen, Moonwalkers' journey with Tom Hanks has been extended to the 30th of October at Lightroom in King's Cross in London. Tim Peake, Astronauts, the quest to explore space begins on the 1st of September in Truro. Tim, what can we expect from the live show?
Live show, it's covering a lot of what we've spoken about today, really, but all the way through Salyut Skylab, the shuttle era, the International Space Station, Artemis, where we're going. So it's looking at the human element. Right. It's the human story behind this. There are so many funny stories, tragic stories, all these snippets of behind the scenes, what it takes to be an astronaut.
We're going to get you up again.
Get up to.
We're going to get you up again. Come on.
I am helping. I'm helping to put together an all UK mission, working with Axiom Space at the moment in the UK Space Agency. So who knows?
Well,
watch this space.
Let us know.
Are you finally going to answer the great mystery of, hey, how do you go to the bathroom? Is that not the most frequently asked question of anybody?
Kids have asked that all the time.
Most frequently asked. And I think it's interesting. That's a story in itself as how these systems have developed over the years. And I had no idea that poor old Al Shepard, when he launched as the first American to launch into space, they hadn't thought of that. And he didn't even have. We wear these maximum absorbency garments now. They're adult diapers, basically nappies. For you're spending hours on the rocket, and you've got hours before you rendezvous with the space station. It had nothing. And there were plenty of delays going on in the countdown to his launch. And at one point he said, well, either I go in my suit or we scrub the launch. And so flight surgeons said, go in your suit, and flew to space with, as he called it, a wetback.
Whereas you've basically reconciled the fact you're going to be drinking the same water with it.
Well, we go through that, and you look at each other around the breakfast table as you're sipping your tea, thinking, I wonder whose urine I'm drinking this morning.
On that note, tickets on sale now, fame.co.uk/Tim Peake. Tom Hanks, Tim Peake, thank you so much.
Lovely talk.
Thank you.